A rescue worker had just completed a 40-hour shift amidst the worst flooding in a decade. He didn't return to the station, but instead turned back towards the dilapidated wooden house at number 317, a place where a checkmark had been accidentally omitted. When the door creaked open, and he saw a 6-year-old girl huddled in the dark kitchen cabinet, her eyes wide with panic, clutching a soaking wet doll, the instinct that had saved his life on the edge of life and death tapped out 3 cold, sharp beats. Something was being deliberately concealed, a child left behind, a rescue map altered, and a web of power leaking from the very floodwaters. That noon, the sky in Bright Ridge, Texas, was grey as ash. The rain wasn't torrential but heavy and steady. The wind lashed against the low roofs, flapping corrugated iron sheets rhythmically. In residential area number 7, the water was already halfway up car tires. The warning system had been activated, but the power had been cut off early that morning. No sirens, no bells, no loudspeakers. People shouted to each other, calling out for evacuation through windows and rooftops. The town's police and local rescue forces were stretched thin. Chaos was the most accurate word to describe the scene. Among the National Guard troops urgently deployed, Sergeant Andrew Keller was one of the first to arrive. He had been at many flood hotspots in Louisiana and Alabama. At 34, Andrew was decisive, alert, and persistent. At 12:40 p.m., as he and his rescue team stopped near a small alley with only a few low wooden houses, the team leader said, "This row of houses at the end of the area is marked as checked." Andrew looked at the map, then at reality. "But why doesn't number 317 have a painted mark on the wall?" The team leader looked again. "Could be a miss. But if you have the energy, give it a quick look. We have 20 minutes before the water reaches the secondary levee." Andrew nodded. He didn't say more. During floods, just one house missed could mean a life lost in the water. He fastened his safety harness, took an extra length of rope. Then he stepped into the water. The water was waist deep. Step by step, he clung to window frames, damp walls, walking and straining to listen. House number 317 was tucked behind 2 larger houses. Andrew pushed gently, and the door opened easily, without a sound. He called out, "Is anyone home?" No reply. Only the sound of water dripping from the ceiling onto the rotting wooden floor. He waded inside, calling out again. Still no one. But then he stopped. There was a sound, small, weak. Thump, thump, thump. He turned his head. The sound was coming from the kitchen, in the back. Not the wind, not the water. It was a beat. Very steady. Andrew pulled a flashlight from his jacket, shining it towards the kitchen cabinet. He moved closer, slowly. Then he stopped, placing his hand on the cabinet door handle. Thump, thump. He opened it. A little girl was curled up inside the wooden cabinet, soaked, her hair matted with water, clutching an old doll. She was wearing a red sweater, but the red was stained brown with mud. Her eyes were wide open, unblinking, but not looking at him. Her lips were purple, her face cold, her gaze terrified. Andrew didn't ask any questions. The first thing he did was take off his rescue jacket and wrap it around her. He said softly, "I'm a rescue worker. I'm going to get you out of here, okay?" The girl didn't reply, but when he gently picked her up, she didn't struggle. She just held onto the doll tightly, as if it were the only thing left in the world. With the girl in his arms, Andrew turned back. The water had risen a few more inches. On the way back, the rain suddenly became heavier. The wind gusted, forcing him to lean to maintain balance. When he was about 100 meters from the pickup point, a large billboard, broken off by the wind from afar, slid across the water, heading straight for him and the girl. Andrew only had time to turn, shielding the billboard with his back. He fell into the water. The girl fell too, but thanks to the small life jacket on her, she floated. Andrew quickly scrambled up, pulling her back. Luckily, no one was hurt. A resident standing on a nearby rooftop recorded the scene with a phone. The image wasn't clear, but it was enough to show a man rushing out into the wind and rain, saving a girl who was fading in his arms. Once they reached dry ground, medical personnel took the girl. She didn't cry, but as the nurse carried her away, Andrew stayed close. At that moment, she turned her head to look at him, her eyes still wide, and whispered very softly, "Mum and Dad told me not to follow." I listened, so I stayed. Andrew stood still. He didn't fully understand the words, but he knew one thing. No child should be left alone in a flood like this. He clenched his fist, looking at the rain that hadn't stopped, and in his head, questions began to form that no one could answer at that moment. But that last sentence would stay with him for a long time. When the rescue vehicle left the flooded area, Emily was taken directly to the evacuation center located at Bright Ridge Elementary School, the highest point in the area. Andrew went with her all the way to the medical room door. Nurses wearing nylon gowns and masks. One took her from his arms. "What's her condition?" the nurse asked. "Cold, exhausted, no visible injuries, but emotionally weak," Andrew replied, his eyes still on the girl. The doctor on duty that day was a woman in her 50s, with silver hair at her temples, named Clara. After examining her, she said to Andrew, "No obvious injuries, no broken bones, no water in her lungs. But the girl shows signs of psychological shock from prolonged isolation, slow reactions, almost no emotions." Andrew nodded. Emily was placed on a cot, wrapped in a thin blanket. She didn't say anything, didn't ask anything, didn't close her eyes to sleep either, her hand still clutching the wet doll. Every few minutes, she would tap her fingertips lightly on the cot, as if she were still in that cramped kitchen cabinet. 2 hours later, the nurse reported back. Emily wouldn't eat. No screaming, no crying. Just silence. The next morning, Andrew returned to the center. He went to the medical room, asking about her. Emily was sitting by the window. The sun had broken through slightly. She was still holding the doll, her eyes empty. He sat down on a chair beside her, not asking anything immediately. After a while, she spoke, her voice as small as a whisper. "They said they were just going for a little while. Deliver something and come back soon." But I waited and waited. Andrew gently asked, "Did they say they would come back for you?" Emily nodded, then shook her head. Then she tapped lightly on the arm of the chair, a familiar action. Andrew sat silently for a moment. He gave the girl her space. When he returned to the information desk in the center, a volunteer showed him the evacuation list. "Here, full names, Richard and Laura Grace, house number 317, right?" Andrew nodded. "They left the afternoon before the heavy rain started. It's noted here, private evacuation by personal vehicle." Andrew looked at the dates. They left more than a day before Emily was found. 3 days later, as the center began receiving people returning to search for relatives, 2 people walked into the main hall. A man wearing a white shirt and black jeans, pulling a carry-on suitcase. The woman beside him wearing sunglasses, her hair neatly styled, a small cream-colored handbag. The man asked the staff, "Is my daughter here? Her name is Emily Grace." Andrew stood behind, hearing the question clearly. He turned around. The man was Richard Grace. Soon after, the staff led them to the medical area. Emily was sitting reading a coloring book, still clutching her doll. When the 2 entered, she looked up. Richard walked over, saying quickly, "There she is." "Thank God." "Are you okay?" Emily didn't stand up, didn't run over, didn't smile either. She just looked. Laura took off her sunglasses, looked at her daughter, then turned away to check her phone. Richard bent down to pick her up, but didn't hug her tightly, as if everything was fine and they were in a hurry to get home. We were stuck in traffic on the highway. Phone signal was lost. No one told us she was still there, Richard explained, not looking at anyone specifically. Where were you during the flood? Andrew asked. Richard hesitated. We went to Dallas, delivering something. Urgent contract, just a day trip. We didn't expect the road to be blocked, then the news went crazy. We couldn't get back. Andrew didn't respond immediately. He just looked at the girl. Emily didn't speak. She just held the doll tighter. Laura looked at her watch, then said softly, "Let's call a car, honey. We still have to check the warehouse." Richard nodded. He turned to Andrew, saying, "Thank you for saving her. It's really fortunate you were there." Andrew nodded, saying nothing more. When the two left, the girl didn't look back. There was only one action. Emily turned her head, looked down at her hand, then tapped her fingertips lightly on Richard's shoulder 3 times. Thump, thump, thump. Then silence. Andrew stood still, not moving. There were no accusations in his head, but he knew. The feeling creeping into his heart wasn't reassurance. No one raised their voice. No one scolded. No one cried. But everything was wrong somehow. And Andrew couldn't shake that thought. The next morning, Andrew sat in the temporary office at the Rescue Command Center. A simple desk, with only a laptop, an evacuation map, and a stack of pre-printed report templates. He typed each line slowly. Not out of hesitation, but because he wanted to record exactly what he had seen. No more, no less. Emily Grace, 6 years old, found alone in house number 317 Oak Street, in a deep, uninhabited flooded area. She didn't cry, didn't scream, just huddled in the kitchen cabinet, tapping her hands rhythmically as if to maintain her composure. Parents were not present at the time. They appeared 3 days later, saying they were stuck in traffic, unaware that their child was still at home. When they met their daughter, they didn't hug her tightly, didn't ask her much, as if everything was just a little messy. He added a recommendation. File should be forwarded to Texas Child Protective Services. There are signs of child neglect in dangerous circumstances. He read it again. Not adding any emotional words, no conclusions, just reporting what happened. He sent the file through the internal electronic portal, marked it urgent, attaching a photo of the girl when she was found and an extract of her medical record. Finished, he got up to check the evacuation area. The rain had stopped last night. The sun was shining a little today. 3 hours later, his phone rang. Sergeant Keller, a clear female voice from the other end of the line, speaking. "I'm calling from Child Protective Services, East Texas Regional Branch, regarding the file of the girl Emily Grace." "Yes?" "The matter has been redirected for internal handling under the direction of a superior." "Which superior?" Andrew asked. "The office of the mayor of Brightridge. She believes this is an urgent matter that doesn't require initiating a state law investigation process." "Why?" The other end hesitated for a moment, then said, "The mayor believes this isn't worth opening an official file. The girl wasn't injured, was safely picked up by her parents. This is an oversight in a crisis." Those are her exact words. Andrew hung up. He didn't say anything more. He wasn't angry. He was calmly facing the problem. But he felt something was being covered up. He requested a direct meeting with Mayor Bonnie Hale, arranged for that afternoon. The mayor's office was on the 2nd floor of City Hall. The room wasn't large, with a glass window overlooking the park that had been almost completely flooded the previous week. Bonnie wore a light grey suit, her hair in a neat bun, wearing thin-rimmed glasses. She stood up to greet Andrew as he entered, offering her hand. "Sergeant Keller, I've heard a lot about you this past week. I'm very grateful that you saved little Emily." "I was just doing my job," Andrew replied, shaking her hand lightly and sitting down. "I heard you sent a report on the girl's condition, and I intervened to handle it." Bonnie's voice was gentle, but clearly enunciating each word. "According to state law, if a child is left alone in a dangerous area, welfare agencies need to step in to investigate." "That's right, but this is a special situation. The whole town was submerged, people scattered, everyone was confused. Maybe the girl's parents were just unintentionally stuck outside. Making a big deal out of it now will cause more disruption. We need to focus on rebuilding." Andrew sat still. "I understand you care. So do I. But if every small mistake becomes an investigation file, this system will collapse." The mayor closed the book in front of her. "Please, let this matter subside." Andrew nodded, but didn't agree. He just wanted to leave that room as soon as possible. As he walked down the City Hall stairs, he walked slowly, observing the hallway. A young administrative staff member had just stepped out of the planning office, carrying a stack of documents and a large envelope. Perhaps due to haste, an envelope fell to the floor without her noticing. Andrew bent down to pick it up, calling, "Excuse me, you dropped something." But she had turned the corner of the hallway, not hearing him. He looked at the envelope, unsealed, already opened. The first document was a contract for the supply of emergency relief supplies, bearing the red seal of the town of Brightridge, the bold print on the top left. Supplier, Grace Holdings, Incorporated. Owner, Richard A. Grace. He reread the name, Richard Grace, Emily's father. He looked at the contract. Date of signing, 1 week before the flood. Items, rescue pumps, life jackets, bottled water. Total value, $1.4 million. Approved by Mayor Bonnie Hale. Andrew folded the paper, put it in the envelope, and went up to return it to the receptionist. When he stepped outside, the weather had cleared. The wind brushed lightly through his hair, refreshing. But in his heart, something became clearer. He whispered a sentence, not meant for anyone to hear. "This isn't a small matter." 2 days after sending the report and meeting Mayor Bonnie Hale, Andrew received no further feedback from Child Protective Services. Everything suddenly became strangely quiet. No one mentioned the matter. No additional meetings were held. No information about Emily or her family. Andrew didn't say it, but he didn't let it go. That afternoon, after his shift, he went to a small cafe near the administrative area. There, he met Noah Bennett, an old friend who had served in the military, now working as a logistics officer for the state's Disaster Relief Coordination Center. Noah opened his laptop, leaning in to show Andrew the screen. "Here, a list of companies that have won relief supply contracts in East Texas in the last 3 years. Find me Grace Holdings Incorporated," Andrew said. Noah typed a few keys, then raised his eyebrows. "Got it. Appears a total of 6 times. First time was last year, after Hurricane Hannah. The most recent, 1 week before this flood." He scrolled down to the PDF contracts. Andrew carefully looked at each file. Those contracts marked urgent priority all had approval signatures from the Brightridge Mayor's office. "The average value of each contract is more than double the standard," Noah added, "and they're usually processed very quickly. Usually, there's a minimum of 7 days for bidding, but this company always gets approved in 2 days, sometimes less." Andrew didn't react. He just pulled out his phone, taking screenshots of each document. "What are you going to do with these?" "Don't know yet. But it's clear something's not right." The next day, Andrew went to the public library. Not wanting to use his personal computer, he used a public computer to access the town's public records. He checked the budget allocation charts from last year to the present, looking for relief contract files, contracting units. Each document he opened, he saved a screenshot. The data was small, scattered, but when viewed together, the picture began to emerge. Grace Holdings, Inc. had only been registered for more than 2 years. Not many employees, no private warehouse, but still received many large contracts worth millions of dollars. All approved by one party, the Bright Ridge Mayor's office. As Andrew left the library, a woman called softly from behind. "Sergeant Keller?" He turned around. It was Lisa, a low-level administrative staff member from City Hall. She was about 30 years old, black hair, small frame, wearing a light blue shirt. "I saw you at the mayor's office the other day. I just want to say something quietly. Don't know where you heard it." Andrew nodded. Lisa lowered her voice. "Be careful, Sergeant. No one here touches Mr. Richard. Bonnie takes care of everything for him. I don't care who they are. If a child almost died because of adults' negligence, I can't stand by." Lisa just nodded and turned away, saying nothing more. But in her eyes shone a hint of relief, the relief of someone finally speaking out. A week passed. The school began to receive students again. But Emily wasn't there. The school reported to the support center that she had difficulty sleeping, often waking up in the middle of the night and crying, for unclear reasons. Emily was taken to the regional mental health hospital, as suggested by the school counselor. Andrew heard the news and visited that afternoon. The hospital room was a small room, lightly lit, with pale cream walls. Emily was sitting on the floor, arranging pieces of paper into the shape of a roof. She was doing it very meticulously, quietly. When she saw Andrew enter, Emily only looked up at him. Then she looked down to continue folding. Andrew sat down opposite her, not asking anything immediately. After a while, Emily said, "I know my mum and dad didn't plan to come back right away." "Why do you think that?" The girl put the piece of paper down, looking at him. "I heard them say, 'We'll figure it out after the job is done.'" Her voice was even, not sad, just like repeating what she had heard clearly. Andrew didn't know how to react. He just placed his hand on his knee, not touching her. That night, at the rescue command area, Andrew sat alone in the office. On the table were the documents he printed out from the library and the evacuation map his team used during the rescue. He opened the map, finding Area 317 Oak Street, where Emily lived. There were marked danger zones, areas prioritized for relief. There were red, yellow, and blue symbols. He searched for Emily's address for a long time, a small dot located on the edge of the red circle. Not marked as rescue priority. He paused. In a small folded corner, the house where the girl was rescued was not on the priority support list, not because it was forgotten, but because it was deliberately excluded. 3 days after discovering the altered map, Andrew sent an official request to the Texas Child Protective Services, requesting a review of the guardianship status of Emily Grace. He presented everything in full: the circumstances of the rescue, signs of neglect, the discovery of the unlisted evacuation area, and the unusual silence from local authorities. The file was sent on Monday. By Thursday afternoon, he received a response in the form of an email with the short line, "File returned." Reason: invalid information. Duplicates of file being processed internally. Andrew opened the attached file, but the information fields in the document didn't match what he'd sent earlier. The send date was changed to 3 days earlier. The name of the processing officer was deleted and replaced with internal forwarding. He flipped it back and forth, checking carefully. The original he kept separately on his computer was completely different. There were clear signs that someone had edited the content to make the file invalid. That night, he received a strange email. The sender was Sarah Newton, a reporter for an independent investigative website in Austin. The content of the letter was short. Sergeant Keller, I've been following your story. You just saved a little girl, and I want to save the whole town. We should meet. An hour later, they were sitting at a small diner next to the highway, where trucks often stopped for a break. Sarah was about 30 years old, her hair neatly tied, wearing glasses, carrying a thick stack of documents. I first came to Brightridge when writing about the misuse of aid after Hurricane Harvey last year, Sarah said, not raising her voice. When I heard about Emily's case, I started to suspect. And then, I found a name that had appeared since last year. Richard Grace. She pushed the stack of documents towards Andrew. During last year's hurricane, some contracts to provide relief supplies were also awarded to Grace Holdings, Inc., even though the company was newly established and didn't have complete bidding records. The press wasn't clear about anything at the time, but this year, that name came back, amidst a case of a little girl being left behind and a mayor intervening to silence the matter. Andrew opened the documents. The lines of text, numbers, lists. Nothing too complicated, but strangely repetitive. The company name, the way the money was spent, the person who signed the approval. Sarah continued. According to my investigation, Grace Holdings is just a facade. Behind it are 3 other companies with the same registered address, the same operator, but changing names and owners continuously. Each company receives a small portion of the contract to avoid budget checks. Andrew said, I saw Emily's house wasn't in the priority area. She could have been in more danger if no one had discovered it in time. Sarah nodded. That's what made me sure. The area was deliberately removed from the list to reduce actual costs, because it's an old residential area with low property values, no one worth saving. The next morning, Andrew stopped by the regional mental health hospital where Emily was being treated. He met the treating doctor, a black woman with a soft voice, experienced with traumatized children. The girl is starting to talk more, but mostly repeating what adults have said. Some very specific, the doctor said. She opened the recorder, playing Andrew a passage recorded in yesterday's conversation. Before leaving, Dad told Mom, no one will pay attention to her. Old house, no one cares. We'll save quite a bit. The room was silent. Andrew listened again. There was no anger in the girl's voice, just a reminder, as evenly as the way young children often remember every word of adults. We can verify this recording if it needs to be used as evidence, the doctor added. Andrew nodded. In the evening, Andrew and Sarah sat down together to review all the documents. They marked the overlaps, the contract signing dates, the amounts of money, the location of the relief areas, the unusually quick approval signatures. When Sarah compared the relief area map with the list of contractors, she stopped for a long time at a corner of the map. Look at this. Residential area number 7. Emily's house is here, right? Right. And here, the list of priority cuts, saving nearly $200,000 in supply payments because they weren't included in the rescue of this area. Who benefits? Andrew didn't say anything. Sarah whispered, not an omission. This is deliberately excluding to increase profit margins. That statement was not refuted. No further arguments were needed. What they were holding in their hands finally began to piece together into a picture. A picture not of the flood, but of people. That weekend, Andrew and Sarah met in the small apartment she rented near the town center. On the table were all the documents they had collected. Contracts signed by the mayor's office. Lists of areas excluded from the rescue zone. Audio recording of Emily's words. Images of the altered map. Names of companies related to Grace Holdings. Andrew said, I can't keep this in my hands anymore. If we wait any longer, everything could be deleted. Sarah nodded. She had contacted an editor at the Texas State television station, a segment called Dark Corner, The Truth Behind the Veil. The editor accepted the documents on the condition that they be allowed to verify the source independently. To protect the safety of both, they sent the files through an anonymous account, clearly stating, "Internal source related to disaster relief fraud in Brightridge." Below, they simply wrote the line, "Don't let another child be left behind." Saturday night, at 7 p.m., the report aired. The program lasted 18 minutes, beginning with a blurry image, a small girl being carried out of the water by a rescue worker. Then, the lead-in voice rang out. A small town in Texas, a child left behind in a flood, and a series of contracts worth millions of dollars that have never been made public. Dark Corner today, the second flood in Brightridge. The image of the altered relief zone map was shown. Next was a list of related companies, organization charts, and a recording of a small child's voice. No one will pay attention to her. We'll save quite a bit. At the end of the program, the host concluded with a sentence. While people were struggling amidst natural disasters, someone considered human lives a cost to be cut. The next morning, the town was in turmoil. In front of City Hall, a group of residents planted banners holding up signs, "We want to know the truth." Relief is to save people, not to get rich. Social media spread the clip and images of Emily. Some residents asked to meet the soldier who saved the girl. 2 days later, the Houston FBI office confirmed the opening of an official investigation file. They summoned Mayor Bonnie Hale, Richard Grace, and some related officials to work initially. However, that afternoon, Andrew was called to the Rescue Force Command headquarters. A direct commanding officer, Colonel White, sat across from him. His face wasn't angry, but clearly serious. "Did you send information to the press?" he asked. Andrew was silent for a few seconds. "I didn't disclose personal identities, didn't reveal classified documents. All were from public sources. But your actions have upset many people, not only in Brightridge, but also those involved in state-level contracts." "I didn't do anything wrong." "Maybe right. But this is a hornet's nest, Andrew. And if you keep digging deeper, it's not just you who will be affected. We may be pressured from above. The entire force may be withdrawn from this area. And the people will suffer the consequences." Andrew didn't answer. Mr. White sighed, then said, "Order from command. You will be temporarily transferred out of the mission at Brightridge, starting tomorrow." That evening, Andrew visited Emily. She was playing in the therapy room, arranging pieces into a bridge. When she saw him enter, she looked up, silent for a few seconds, then walked closer. Saying nothing, the girl hugged him. Andrew bent down, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. He was about to say a few simple sentences, but before he could, Emily whispered, "I'm not afraid of the water anymore. If I get left behind again, I know you'll come." Andrew held her hand for a moment longer. Not long, but enough for him to know that what he had done wasn't in vain. The next morning, he sat in the military vehicle leaving town. The rain from last night only remained on the car windows, the wet roofs, the glistening streets reflecting the early sun. Andrew looked into the distance. The flooded field was gradually receding. In the sky, the clouds had cleared, the rain had stopped. But inside the town, he knew, the real flood had only just begun. Andrew looked into the distance. The flooded field was gradually receding. In the sky, the clouds had cleared, the rain had stopped. But inside the town, he knew, the real flood had only just begun. The vehicle continued to roll slowly along the highway south. The power poles leaned to the side of the road. Warning signs were still covered in mud. No one spoke in the car. The soldiers on the same journey sat silently, looking out as he did. Andrew took a small piece of paper from his pocket, a note he had written quickly at his desk a few days earlier. Scrawled writing, 317 Oak Street, not on the relief list. He put it back in his wallet. Next to the note was a printout of a photo of Emily when she was first rescued, her eyes terrified, her hand still clutching the doll. Andrew wondered if he hadn't returned to that house that day, just because a coat of paint hadn't been applied to the wall. What would have happened? The question didn't need an answer, but it would remain. As part of the flood, not coming from water, but from things that were deeper: power, silence, and indifference. In his pocket, the phone vibrated. A new message from a strange number. They know you sent the file. Be careful. Andrew read it and turned off the screen. He wasn't surprised, nor was he afraid, but he understood one thing. From now on, every step would be watched. Which was also good. Perhaps that was a way for the truth to continue. When everything seemed to be over, the unexpected turning point came. 3 days after the report aired, under pressure from public opinion, the Houston FBI office officially announced the opening of a federal investigation into signs of fraud in disaster relief funding and the cover-up of wrongdoing in the town of Brightridge. On Monday morning, City Hall temporarily closed. The iron gates were locked, with signs reading, "Internal work, no public access." But people still stood outside the gate. Some carried signs with Emily's picture, under the line, "A child left behind." The whole town silent. In the interrogation room at the FBI office temporarily located at the Houston Federal Police Headquarters, Bonnie Hale sat across from 2 investigators. She wore a grey suit, no badge of office. Her voice was calm. "I didn't seek personal gain. I was just trying to keep Brightridge from collapsing after years of natural disasters. I had to approve contracts quickly to ensure equipment and supplies arrived on time. Otherwise, hundreds of people could have died." An investigator asked, "And what reason did you choose Grace Holdings for?" Bonnie replied, "They were the only supplier who agreed to deliver urgently within 24 hours. I had no other choice." The answer was fully recorded. No signs of wavering. However, that same morning, Sarah Newton, the reporter who sent the initial information, was also invited to provide documents. She confirmed the entire source of information began with a rescue worker, not disclosing the name, as agreed to protect the source. She submitted all the notes, maps, contracts, and recordings, including a handwritten copy of an internal note secretly provided by an administrative staff member named Lisa. In it was a recorded conversation from a closed meeting between Mayor Bonnie and Richard Grace. "We need to narrow down the rescue zone. The fewer names on the list, the better the profit margin. As long as the money comes in, no one will notice a missing child." When the recording was played in the investigation meeting, the investigators requested an immediate backup. It was the first turning point. News spread quickly. 3 major newspapers in Texas published articles on "A girl left behind," "A town deceived." Comments flooded social media. Many people from neighboring areas came to participate in a peaceful march in front of Brightridge City Hall. Sarah was there, taking pictures of handwritten signs. The girl was forgotten by the flood, but we don't forget justice. No more being left in the kitchen cabinet. We pay taxes to save people, not to put blood money in someone's pocket. Pressure from public opinion forced state officials to send a federal inspection team to review 5 natural disasters in the past 4 years that occurred in the southeast Texas area, all with Grace Holdings on the contractor list. In just 1 week, 3 other city officials in Brightridge resigned. Head of the Budget Department Town, Administrative Advisor Chairman of the Building Permits Board. They didn't give specific reasons, only writing in the application, due to internal tensions and pressure from the public. The FBI issued the next announcement. All individuals who participated in signing contracts with signs of wrongdoing will be gradually summoned, including intermediary companies and subcontracting organizations. That night, Sarah received an anonymous call. The man's voice was low, quiet, calling from a strange number. "I used to work in the mayor's office. I quit now, but there's something you should know. Richard said this in front of 4 people. Sarah was silent, turning on the recorder. The girl wasn't on the relief list because she didn't bring a profit. Then the other end hung up, leaving no name, leaving no number. Sarah sat silently at her desk. On the computer screen, the photo of Emily hugging the doll in the soldier's arms was still open. She put her hand on the picture, and in her heart, she knew. The fight wasn't over, but the truth had spoken. That night, Sarah left the press center, walking slowly along the small street where volunteers were still gathered to discuss. The cafe at the end of the road was still brightly lit. People were still exchanging ideas enthusiastically. An old woman stepped forward, shook her hand, saying briefly, "You are the one who helped speak out what this whole town has been silent about for too long." The sentence wasn't long, but it made Sarah silent all the way back to her apartment. On social media, the hashtag #BrightridgeWakeUp began to spread. Neighboring towns, which had also received supplies from Grace Holdings, began to have people send anonymous messages to the editorial office where Sarah collaborated. They mentioned other shady contracts, not in Brightridge, but in 3 adjacent counties. A wave was forming. No one knew where it would lead, but it didn't come from major media. It came from small people, seemingly disconnected pieces, like Lisa, like Emily, like Andrew. The next morning, at the Brightridge mayor's office, an emergency meeting was held among those remaining in the management team. There were no notes, no press attended. But through the closed door, the guard heard a slightly trembling voice say, "If both Richard and Bonnie are prosecuted, who's next?" No one answered, only the sound of a pen tapping lightly on the wooden table. 3 beats, thump, thump, thump. At the FBI office in Houston, interrogation sessions began to be held continuously for 3 days. The room was small, grey walls, with cameras mounted on the corner of the ceiling, 2 investigators facing the person being interrogated, one by one. Richard Grace was invited first. Light grey shirt, no tie, dry voice. "I didn't do anything wrong. I just provided the right goods requested. The person who signed the approval was the mayor's office. I had no right to change the relief map or the budget. She approved the contract. I just followed the procedure." An investigator asked, "Were you aware that your daughter's house was not in the relief zone?" Richard paused for a few seconds. "That was an administrative error. I was not directly involved in the zoning." No one completely believed the answer, but every word was recorded, word for word. The next interrogation was Laura Grace, his wife, Emily's mother. She sat with her head bowed, eyes swollen, no makeup. Her voice was small, trembling. I knew leaving her behind was wrong. But at that time, I was too afraid of losing that contract. Which contract? The contract 3 days before the flood. The people in Dallas wanted to meet in person. They said if they didn't meet, they'd postpone the signing. Richard said he'd only be gone for half a day, would come back to pick her up. But then he got stuck. "Did you tell anyone that your daughter was still at home?" "No." "Why?" "Because I was afraid people would think I was a bad mother. And because, if anyone knew, it might stop the contract from being signed." The investigator just nodded, marking on the paper in front of him. 3 days later, the federal prosecutor issued a formal indictment. Mayor Bonnie Hale was charged with 3 counts: abuse of power, concealing wrongdoing in public contracts, endangering residents, through manipulation of relief policies. Richard Grace was charged with 2 counts: defrauding disaster relief funds, abandoning a minor in a dangerous situation. The recommended starting sentence, 15 years in prison. Laura Grace was included as an accomplice in a supporting role. A suspended sentence was under consideration, pending the court's conclusion. Meanwhile, Emily Grace was transferred to a temporary foster family in the northern suburbs. The childless couple had participated in many post-disaster childcare programs. The therapist, who had followed Emily from the beginning, wrote in the file, "The girl no longer exhibits negative repetitive behaviors. Eating and sleeping are stable, emotional responses are gradually opening up. High potential for recovery if she continues to live in a stable environment with genuine care." Emily began to learn to draw, using watercolors to paint figures holding hands in the rain, but no longer drawing flooded houses or dark kitchen cabinets. News of the indictment spread throughout the state. Television reported on it every day. The reports focused more on the system of wrongdoing than on individuals. But people still remembered the name of the soldier who rescued the girl, even though he had never appeared on the air. A week later, Andrew Keller was invited back to Brightridge as an official witness for the preliminary hearing. The car took him to town on a bright, sunny morning. On the way, people began to recognize him. They didn't surround him, didn't shout, just greeted him with a nod, a quiet but warm look. An elderly man stepped forward, offering his hand. "Thank you for not closing your eyes." Andrew just shook his hand, nodding slightly. "I just did what was necessary." That evening, he was invited to dinner at the home of the family caring for Emily. The table was simple: roast chicken, vegetable soup, apple juice. Emily sat by the window, her hair tied up, still holding her old doll, but this time wearing a clean floral dress. When she saw Andrew, she walked over, silent for a moment. Then she looked up, smiling, not forced, not silent, a real smile. "You're the most reliable person I know." On the morning of August 24th, the Texas Federal Court opened a preliminary hearing on the case involving wrongdoing in the disaster relief program in the town of Brightridge. The name of the case was officially recorded in the file as the State of Texas versus Hale, Grace and Grace for abuse of power, fraudulent funding, and abandonment of a minor. The courtroom wasn't large, but it was crowded. More than 40 people were present, including reporters, prosecuting attorneys, defense attorneys, and a group of local residents invited as listeners. There was no live camera, but every word was recorded and stored in accordance with regulations. The prosecutor presented each piece of evidence in chronological order. First was the audio recording from Emily, played right in the courtroom with a small but clear child's voice. "No one will pay attention to her. We'll save quite a bit." No one in the courtroom spoke during that recording. Next were the fraudulent contracts under the name of Grace Holdings, Inc., with approval signatures from the Bonnie Hales mayor's office. Attached was a map of the altered relief zone. Much of residential area number 7, where Emily lived, had been removed from the support list. Finally, there was testimony from Lisa, the administrative staff member who directly heard the exchange between Bonnie and Richard Grace about reducing costs by shrinking the area to be rescued. Sarah Newton was also invited to testify. She confirmed all the sources, the time of collection, and the documents she received from the initial rescuer, Andrew Keller. Mid-trial, as the judge prepared to move on to the closing arguments between the two sides, Laura Grace unexpectedly asked to speak. She stood up, her hand trembling slightly, her eyes blurred with tears. Her voice was small, but clear word for word. "The girl used to ask me, 'If there's money, will you come play with me?' I couldn't answer." No one laughed. No one reacted. The entire courtroom was completely silent, not because of overwhelming emotion, but because that question had crossed the boundaries of legality. It touched something that could not be justified with words. At the end of the day, the judge delivered the verdict. His voice was not high, not heavy, just even, as justice was carried out without having to shout. Bonnie Hale received 12 years in prison, was stripped of all political rights, and was banned from holding public office permanently. Richard Grace received 15 years in prison, along with an order to seize all assets related to fraudulent relief contracts. Laura Grace received 4 years suspended sentence, was subject to long-term behavioral supervision, and officially lost legal custody of Emily. After the trial, Emily was transferred entirely to the special guardianship of the state. The family caring for her was granted the right to propose legal adoption if conditions remained stable. The most recent psychological record showed that Emily was responding well to the current environment, no longer exhibiting negative repetitive behaviors or fear of the dark. She began to like to draw and could communicate naturally with unfamiliar adults. A week later, Andrew Keller received an official letter of thanks from the Texas State Government Office. The letter stated that he had played an important role in the discovery, reporting, and support of the expansion of the federal investigation related to the wrongdoings at Brightridge. The letter was printed on plain paper, signed by hand by a representative of the Civil Investigation Committee. Andrew didn't keep the letter as a memento. He wrapped up the photo of him holding Emily in the floodwaters, put it in an envelope with a simple handwritten note. "If everyone does their little part, no one will be left behind." He sent it by mail to the Texas Child Protective Services office without including a sender's name. In the reception room of the rescue unit where he was serving, that photo was now hung in a simple wooden frame located near the entrance. There was no line of honor. There was only a small line recording the name of the town, Brightridge. No one was forced to stop to read, but every time they passed, someone would nod slightly, because sometimes justice doesn't begin with a summons, but just by turning around, checking an unmarked house. A year after the historic flood, the town of Brightridge held its first public memorial. There was no loud music, no stage, just a white ribbon hanging across the square, a few dozen chairs, arranged evenly, and a wooden sign erected next to the flagpole. On the sign, they hung a single photograph, an old, blurry photo taken from a distance, a soaked soldier holding a small girl in his arms, amidst the flood and the light of the afternoon rain. There was no lengthy explanation. Under the photo was just a short line, engraved, "Sometimes saving one person is saving something bigger." People came to stand silently before the photo. Some placed their hands on the wooden frame. Some nodded, then continued on. No one said much, but their presence was an acknowledgement that what happened last year had left something that wasn't easily erased. In the north of town, more than 10 miles away, Emily Grace now lived in a small 2-story wooden house. The family that adopted her were retired teachers, living simply, loving plants. Emily was in the 2nd grade, taking the bus to school, had a classmate named Clara, liked to draw with crayons, and was very good at writing. In an end-of-semester writing assignment, the topic was, "Tell about something that makes you no longer afraid." Emily wrote, "I used to be left behind in a rainstorm, but someone came back, and I'm not afraid anymore." The teacher read the essay, just nodding, not asking more, but that night she quietly printed it out, laminated it, and sent a copy to the town library, placing it next to the old photo. Emily, for the first time, was taken to the state prison to visit her parents at her personal request. The trip was arranged by the social worker, with a supervisor accompanying her. The girl wore a simple blue dress, her hair tied on both sides, carrying a folder of drawings. The visitation area was a room lit by fluorescent lights, plastic tables, and metal chairs arranged in rows. Richard and Laura Grace were already there. When Emily entered, they both stood up at the same time, as if wanting to run to hug her. But they stopped halfway, not knowing whether they should or not. Laura was the first to speak, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, honey." Richard followed quietly but rapidly. "I know no words are enough, but I sincerely ask for your forgiveness." Emily didn't say anything immediately. She just pulled out a chair, sat down opposite them, placing the folder in front of her. Then, slowly, she pulled out a crayon drawing. In the picture was a family of 3, standing next to each other under the eaves. The father, the mother, and a small girl. Above was a rainbow and a simple line, written crookedly. "I drew this when I missed my parents." The girl pushed the picture towards them, then said softly, "It's okay, Mum and Dad. I'm fine now." The sentence choked Laura up. She covered her face, her shoulders shaking. Richard tried to remain calm, but his eyes were red. No one could say anything more. The silence at that moment, no blame, no resentment, hurt them more than any trial or sentence. The visit only lasted 10 minutes. When Emily stood up to say goodbye, Laura tried to take her hand, but only managed to touch the back of her small hand lightly. Emily smiled slightly, not blaming, not distant, then turned around, walking with the social worker. When the girl left the room, Richard still sat silently, holding the drawing in his heart, not uttering another word. As for Andrew Keller, after leaving the military a few months before, he decided not to continue staying in the rescue force. He chose a different path, opening a small center, specializing in self-defense training, survival skills, and psychological response in disasters for children. The center was located right at the eastern edge of town, in a building renovated from an old fire station. No big signs, no slogans, but everything in it, from the escape route map to the evacuation simulation playroom, was arranged by his own hands. On opening day, Sarah Newton came to interview him one last time for a long segment. 1 year after the flood. She asked, as a way to close things, "Did you ever want to be a hero?" Andrew answered, not looking up from the set of classroom diagram drawings. "I just don't want anyone to have to sit in a kitchen cabinet and wait like that girl." Sarah didn't ask anymore. She just watched him continue working, then closed her notebook, leaving. The article was later printed verbatim with those words, without any exclamation points. One early autumn afternoon, the sky was clear. The wind was light. In the backyard of the wooden house, Emily ran happily among the rows of flowers planted in straight lines. The girl held a small paper flag made by herself from a handicraft class. Every step she took left laughter, like seeds sown in the wind. Andrew sat under the eaves, the open book on his lap, not reading further. He watched the girl run, then looked up at the sky. His hair was slightly longer than before, the old military uniform replaced by a simple sweater and mud-stained shoes. Emily ran over, plopped down beside him, resting her head on his shoulder, panting with exhaustion. Andrew didn't say anything, nor was it necessary. The wind blew lightly through the eaves. There were no more warning sirens, no more floods. Only the sound of the wind rustling through the corrugated iron roof, and the laughter of children. A flood season had passed, and another life, peaceful, normal, but right, had begun. 2 years later, on a chilly afternoon in early winter, as the town of Brightridge had just experienced its first cold snap, the mailbox of the Children's Training Centre, where Andrew worked, received an envelope with no return address. The paper was yellowed, the edges slightly bent. Inside was a handwritten letter, the writing still young, careful. "Dear Andrew, today I learned to draw a map, But the teacher didn't make us color it according to the template. I got to choose my favorite colors. I redrew the old house number 317 and drew more blue around it. Because this time, I think it deserves to be in the area to be rescued. Emily. Andrew finished reading, folded the letter, saying nothing. He stepped out into the yard where the children were learning how to start a survival fire with rocks and steel. A boy struck a lighter and sparks flew, cheering. Another girl struggled to erect a tent, her face wrinkled in the cold wind. Andrew sat down, only helping lightly with one operation, not saying much, but his eyes softened, deep and bright, as when he first saw Emily sitting in the kitchen cabinet, her eyes wide, waiting for someone to return. He didn't know how these children would grow up later, but at least he was sure of one thing. They would know how to mark where they were standing. And if someone was left behind, there would always be someone to come back to find them. Not because someone ordered it, but because of a simple thing. Nowhere is outside the rescue zone. Andrew and Emily's story is not just the journey of rescuing a child in a flood, but also the journey of a soldier choosing not to ignore the long silence of an entire town. Sometimes justice doesn't begin with a trial, but with a coat of paint that hasn't been applied to the wall. A child's eyes that no one stops to look at. A light tap of the hand that no one understands. No one teaches us how to react when standing between right and safe. But perhaps the hardest thing is not finding evidence, but believing in our intuition, enough to come back one more time, at the right time. What do you think about this story? If you were Andrew, would you go back to that house just because of a small detail that seems insignificant? Have you ever felt something is wrong, but everyone else chooses to be silent? If you have ever doubted, been considered overdoing it, or have quietly wondered, does anyone else see this as unusual? Then perhaps you are not alone. I'm here, reading every share of yours, and I will listen, as Andrew listened to that small tap in the rain that no one remembers.